This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The South African president calls for a regional response to the coronavirus outbreak during a virtual SADC meeting. The World Health Organization asked Madagascar to subject its purported cure of COVID-19 to clinical trials. And we look at how families in Africa are coping with the disruptive effects of the coronavirus pandemic. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I'm Richard Sherwood live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. Let's take a look at other stories making headlines this hour. Ethiopia seeks constitutional interpretation on whether or not to hold elections. And in sports, World Athletics President Sebastian Coe to promote sports amongst children after the COVID-19 pandemic. Once again, welcome to Africa Live. Let's begin in South Africa, where South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has appealed to the COVID-19 response teams in neighboring countries to work together. Ramaphosa says he's looking for a more coordinated regional response to the coronavirus pandemic. He convened a virtual consultative meeting with other heads of states in the Southern African Development Community. CGTN's Ulysses Jamela has more.
These leaders met to discuss how the SADC region can collectively plan to adequately respond and recover from the coronavirus outbreak. The presidents of Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia and Angola, as well as the Prime Minister of Lesotho, were part of the meeting. A number of South African cabinet ministers were also in attendance. It was decided that the SADC countries will from now on improve information sharing. There will also be coordination of resources and responses to the virus.
As we all know, we are all confronted with an unprecedented public health crisis that has far-reaching social and economic consequences. I think our numbers, while on the African continent compared with other continents, are not as high. However, we are seeing an increase. And of course, we are all concerned about the impact of this virus on our communities and our societies.
The national commands councils of each country will also from now on engage each other more frequently. That will also apply to the heads of states. There remains a dire shortage of personal protective equipment in many countries in the region. President Ramaphosa says the region must look at increasing production capacity to meet the demand. In the meantime, a coordinated procurement drive has been launched.
I felt that there was a need for us to drive this very strongly, and therefore appointed Zimbabwean business person Strive Masiyiwa to assist with efforts to source personal protection equipment for the region and the continent. And he had already started this work, working with a number of leaders on our continent, and we felt that we should harness his energy and his capability to do this for us.
He acknowledged the assistance that the continent has thus far been receiving from the international community.
In our capacity as chair of the African Union, South Africa has been quite involved in various measures undertaken by our union to contain the spread. In general, the response from the international community has been positive, with various partners making pledges, offering debt relief measures, and providing concrete support in the form of medical supplies.
Other issues that were discussed include consular and immigration matters. Considering the social and economic linkages of the countries in the SADC region, if one country is vulnerable, the others will be affected. It is therefore in that spirit that these leaders want to encourage even more closer relations, especially during these challenging times. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's shift our focus to Madagascar, where a herbal drink known as COVID Organics has generated heated debate. President Andre Rajoelina claims it prevents and cures patients suffering from COVID-19. The World Health Organization wants Madagascar to subject the concoction to clinical trials, insisting that its use could be harmful. CGTN's Nick Modima reports on the raging debate between conventional and herbal medicine.
As the fight against COVID-19 intensifies, countries have rushed to find a cure. In Madagascar, a herbal concoction from Artemisia and other indigenous herbs has caused a national frenzy. Other African countries, among them South Africa, Tanzania, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea and the Republic of Congo, are now showing interest in the Madagascan herbal remedy.
I am communicating with Madagascar. A letter has already been written, and they say some medicine has been found there. We will send a plane and the meds will be brought so that Tanzanians can benefit too. So as a government, we're working day and night.
And not to be left behind, the World Health Organization too.
We are advising the government of Madagascar to take this product through a clinical trial and are prepared to collaborate with them. We've also invited them to join the WHO coordinated solidarity trial where other therapeutics are being tested out.
The plant was first imported into the island nation in the 1970s from China to treat malaria. I spoke to Dr. Kefa Bosiri, a pharmacologist, about the conventional versus herbal medicine.
Not a surprise for traditional healers. And it's not a surprise for people who know about the way herbs are used to manage diseases. There are three things that will stand out. One, they're used in fever. Two, they're used in conditions that seem to promote or create fever. And amongst them, surprisingly, will be even respiratory conditions that have fever. And so the use of Artemisia in a respiratory condition that has fever is not abnormal.
Unmoved by the raging debate, Madagascar has offered to donate the herbal mixture to African countries.
Use of Artemisia annua by Madagascar and the reaction of African countries has been typical of today's setting. Why do I say that? We do not teach MBCHB or doctors who graduate with a degree in medicine about herbal treatment. The ones who are trained in herbal treatment are pharmacists. And in many settings today, when policies are being formulated, it would be prudent for countries to ensure that they do have the input from the pharmacists who have trained in herbal medicine.
President Andre Rajoelina, a former DJ who in 2009, at the age of 34, became the continent's youngest national leader, has reached out to South Africa to support Madagascar in undertaking a scientific analysis of the herbal drink. In the meantime, the World Health Organization has cautioned countries against adopting the product that has not been through clinical tests for safety and efficacy. Nick Mudimba, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's turn our attention back to South Africa, where the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa says at least 19,000 prisoners will be released to help curb the spread of the coronavirus in prisons. This is in response to a United Nations call for countries to reduce the numbers in correctional facilities so that social distancing and self-isolation can be observed. CGTN's Angela Coppola and Yolisa Njamela now report.
The infection count in South Africa's prisons shows some 95 infected officials and 77 infected inmates. This in a prison system that's overcrowded by around 32%, with the Eastern Cape, Gauteng and Limpopo prisons the most overcrowded. It's the overcrowding that's leading to the spread of the coronavirus, prison officials are telling us. And that's why the government heeded the UN call. Only low-risk offenders, of course, will be considered for parole, and it will be done in phases over the next 10 weeks, using the parole board system, of course. People with underlying healthcare issues, offenders over the age of 60, and female offenders with children will go first. Authorities say at the end of the program, overcrowding will have been reduced by around 12.1%. The Justice and Correctional Services Minister, Ron Lamola, says they're also looking at the 5,000 awaiting trial prisoners who can't afford to post bail money, although he didn't provide more details about how they would be dealt with. Lamola says he's not oblivious to the concerns of society about releasing prisoners before they finish serving their sentences, but the move is aimed at protecting the country, as he put it, from the pandemic. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Female prisoners with infants, the elderly, and sick inmates will be considered first for parole as the Justice Ministry tries to reduce the country's prison population. This as authorities try to contain the spread of the coronavirus among prisoners here in South Africa.
Currently, our COVID-19 preventative measures are stretched to the brink. We have managed thus far, but the spread of the virus continues. We ought to act decisively and prevent this invisible killer from rapidly multiplying in our centers.
About 19,000 prisoners will be released from the country's correctional services facilities. This follows a call by the United Nations to all countries to reduce prison populations to maintain social distancing and self-isolation.
States are obliged to prevent foreseeable threats to public health and ensure that all who need vital medical care receive it. Over and above that, the United Nations Standards Minimum Rules for Treatment of Prisoners, also known as the Nelson Mandela Rules, set out measures to protect those in detention.
Government is concerned about COVID-19 cases in prisons that may likely spread to outside communities.
We expect that the virus, that there'll be more offenders and officials that may be infected by the virus because our officials and our remandees come from within society. And I think within that space, there is the opportunity of cross-contamination.
Offenders will be rearrested should they violate their release conditions.
Should the parolees display behavior that is in conflict with the law and erode public confidence on their rehabilitation, we will not hesitate to revoke their parole and incarcerate them. This is a conditional parole.
The process will take place over a period of 10 weeks. The correctional services centers here in South Africa are largely overcrowded, and the latest measures that have been introduced are to further ensure that those centers are not a hotbed of the spread of the coronavirus. Yudisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Our coverage continues. We'll see you on the other side of the break with more news. Here's a look at what's ahead. Ethiopia seeks constitutional interpretation on whether or not to hold elections. And we look at how families in Africa are coping with the disruptive effects of the coronavirus pandemic.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to Africa Live. Let's head over to Ethiopia, where opposition parties say they are against the indefinite postponement of this year's general election. The National Electoral Board cites the coronavirus pandemic as the reason behind this decision. The country's parliament has voted to seek a constitutional interpretation on the issue. CGTN's Gerum Chala has the details from Addis Ababa.
This September, Ethiopia's government in power will conclude its tenure in office, and a general election must be held at least a month before that for citizens to decide who takes over the reins of power. But it is not that simple. The scheduled Ethiopian general elections has been postponed indefinitely due to the coronavirus spread.
Before our decision to postpone this election, we had several discussions with our health experts, and we sought the analysis and prediction on when we can proceed with the plan. The response was that we cannot have any form of elections preparation in April, May, or even beyond.
Following this announcement, and after prominent opposition leaders insist that the general election must be held as scheduled, Ethiopia's parliament has been offered several options to avoid a political crisis. Among the 4 options offered is the dissolution of the parliament, declaring a state of emergency, and seeking a constitutional interpretation. The lawmakers eventually voted to endorse the latter, and the work of constitutional interpretation will be done by the House of Federation, which will help decide the next course of action. Many citizens, however, agree the general election in Ethiopia must not be held at this time. They say the government should use all its resources to tackle COVID-19.
I support the decision of postponing the elections. Given the coronavirus pandemic, it is difficult to stage a credible and an all-inclusive election.
The COVID-19 pandemic is not only our problem, but also one for the rest of the world. Therefore, the decision of postponing this election is not only correct, but it is also fair for everyone. If there are no people, who will benefit from the election?
Already, the Tigray region, which forms part of the federal government, has decided to hold elections on its own, regardless of Parliament's decision. And it looks like the country's electoral board has yet another challenge to deal with. Grumjala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Staying in Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has responded to the opposition parties accusing him of delaying the elections in order to stay in power. The Prime Minister says the call for a transitional government is an attempt by the opposition to grab power. He has warned that his government will take all necessary measures to protect the constitutional order in the country.
The idea of forming a transitional government is invalid, not only from a legal point of view, but also from a consideration of the existing reality, as well as our experience with transitional administration. Even worse is the challenge of COVID-19, coupled with the danger being seen in our region that makes the idea of forming a transitional government even unwise. This is irresponsible. It's not only illegal, but also dangerous. What we want to build is a constitutional democracy. This means that the constitution must be respected and implemented. However, without a constitutional backing, any attempt to get power is absolutely unacceptable. Our constitution on Article 50 primarily puts the mandate of protecting the constitution, and to serve this purpose of protecting the constitutional order, we are prepared to take any necessary measure. Doing this is a job we do based on the constitution and with no negotiation.
Let's now turn to our focus on the continuing series on the impact of the coronavirus pandemic in Africa. The focus today is how Africans in different countries are coping with the COVID-19 measures. And on to Egypt now. Our correspondent Adel Al-Mahroui visited one young family in Cairo whose life has been turned upside down by the coronavirus lockdown. The situation has been especially difficult for the children. But their mother seems to get the full meaning of when life gives you lemons, you should make lemonade.
Since COVID-19 led to a partial lockdown in Egypt, Dalia Khairi decided to take no risks. She wanted to keep her 2 children safe by all means. For 4 weeks, they have not stepped out of their building.
I am extremely worried about their safety, of course. I don't give them the option to go out, not even to take a ride in our car around the neighborhood. The maximum they do is to take their bikes and go up to the roof to see the sunlight.
Keeping a 9- and a 5-year-old entertained inside their home for nearly a month is no easy task. It's even more difficult for Dalia, as her husband's job in Dubai has made him less accessible due to the pandemic. But she realized it's effective to teach the kids a set of new skills.
We're spending so much time together, and that has never happened before. I started giving them some responsibilities. They started helping with the house chores. They've never done that before. During school, everything was ready for them because they didn't have time. Now they rely on themselves greatly.
And whenever that gets boring, she challenges them more.
The kids love to eat out at restaurants, but they realized that this was no longer an option. So I introduced the concept of preparing their own meals at home. It turned out to be a great idea, which has made them release a lot of energy.
They began simply by preparing sandwiches. Now they're capable of baking cookies and making pizzas under her supervision.
They were used to opening the refrigerator door to find the food ready in there. Never have they realized that it consumes a lot of time and effort to make. They started appreciating the efforts I exert in this house more.
Being a teacher has so far helped Dalia survive the pandemic measures. If the government extends the partial lockdown, however, this energetic mother will have to become more creative. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
In Kenya, families have been at home for over a month following a partial lockdown and curfew as the government fights to control the spread of COVID-19. But staying indoors has brought about its own set of unique challenges. CGTN's Robert Nagila spent time with one family in Nairobi who have developed a coping mechanism. Let's take a look.
Mommy? Yes, just a minute.
For an active family used to the outdoors during normal times, Kenya's partial lockdown aimed at controlling the spread of COVID-19 feels like confinement.
It has deprived me of my daily routine. That's basically what it's done, because my day works best if I leave the house at 7 a.m., taking kids to school, and then I go to work and do my thing.
And with schools shut and restrictions on movement in place, it's not been easy on the children either.
Now I miss school, which I thought I'd never do. And I'm kind of sick of staying indoors all day.
The school term has now resumed, and 15-year-old Jennifer is taking her classes online through the app Zoom.
Well, I've had to adjust to online schooling, which was cool at first, but then it got kind of irritating real fast.
The single mother admits, initially, juggling between the children's schooling and her work was a struggle, but she's found a balance.
Oh my goodness, that completely did not work for me. I couldn't get anything done. It's difficult enough getting all my own work done without having to jump up every 2.5 minutes. Yeah, as long as people do something creative every day and get their exercise and get out of bed on time, school helps.
She encourages their creativity and everyone has to do their chores. But after being confined for a long period, she admits the occasional meltdown from a family member and says communication is key.
It's not that there's a lot of fights or anything like that. I mean, sometimes people are a bit unhappy with each other, but generally people are good communicators and they're emotionally self-sufficient. So that if you're not in a good mood, you don't take it out on other people.
They all agree, however, the experience has brought the family closer. That has not stopped Jennifer from making post-quarantine plans.
I plan on seeing a lot of people after this quarantine is over.
The experience is not unique to the Mara family. It's one shared by millions of families across the country. The Mara secret: patience, understanding, space. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Elsewhere in Tanzania, the coronavirus pandemic has changed the lives of millions. Relationships have been strained by self-isolation, social distancing, and other COVID-19 measures. CGTN's Daniel Kijo tells us how some in Tanzania are coping with these changing times.
Godfrey Rugarabamu, known throughout Tanzania as MC Garabi, is one of the country's most popular master of ceremonies. Before COVID-19, he was fully booked for weddings and events. Since the government banned large gatherings, he lost a lot of income. that caused him considerable stress. However, he is finding comfort and support at home, especially from his wife.
She understood the situation and she just took her time to be my comfort zone. So she played her part very well, and what I can say is my relationship status has been upgraded. Yeah, because most of the time I'm with her.
Whilst this couple is enjoying spending time together, psychologist Bupe Mwabenga says not all households have successfully coped with challenges posed by the pandemic. She says people are handling the loss of income, anxiety, fear of illness and changes in lifestyle differently.
The negative side is for those who have not been able to contain the distress. I think they may have emotionally departed more because they have had enough time to quarrel. And you know, the more you quarrel with the person, the more you emotionally get distant.
The government has stopped all schooling, banned sporting activities, discouraged unnecessary movement, and asked people to wear masks. While some see this time as an opportunity to rekindle their relationships, for others, it's been a hard time as they deal with loneliness. The mechanics of romance have changed for singles too. Restrictions on movement have pushed some online, looking for any sort of social interaction.
You end up looking for exes, you chat with them just to connect. You spend a lot of time chatting with people who really don't care for you.
Honestly, since Corona, things are hard because there are times you wish to have a partner. You miss companionship. I get depressed sometimes because I don't have data to get online. I end up bored.
The government's advice on social distancing is bringing unforeseen challenges for both couples and singles alike. How those relationships will look after the COVID-19 crisis will depend on how people adapt and whether they find new ways to manage and nurture their relationships. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
And let's talk a bit of sport. We start with athletics, where World Athletics President Sebastian Coe says he wants to be the voice for children without access to sport around the world. The head of World Athletics says he is planning